Have you ever heard of a country that no longer exists? A name that once made Europe wary. A kingdom that not only created the continent's most elite army, but was also the heart that led the unification of Germany, an event that completely changed modern Europe. Welcome to the story of Prussia, a great power that rose from the shadows of history, then quietly disappeared from the political map, as if it had never existed. And this is not just history. This is a whisper from the past, echoing through every stone, every battlefield, every page of ancient books. Not Rome, not Paris, not London, but a land that began in the northern jungles, where people worshipped the thunder god and lived with the wild nature. Their ancestors, the ancient Baltic tribes, worshipped the god Perkunus, held ceremonies under the sacred tree, sang ancient songs that echoed in the wind. Amber, sea gold, is a sacred treasure and a rare resource that they traded with the outside world. Along the Baltic coast, small wooden villages, wooden boats moored by the waves, that was Prussia before the world knew its name. But then, the wind of change blew, and this time it brought not gods, but crosses and steel swords. The Teutonic order had arrived, knights in the name of God, but here not to preach, but to conquer. They walked through the snow, riding armored horses, the cross fluttering in the winter wind. Prussia was defeated, converted, but not wiped out. They absorbed strength, learned from the very ones who had oppressed them. And then, from the ashes of the burned villages, a new force arose, strong, disciplined, and as cold as the northern climate they lived in. From a hunted tribe, they became Europe's #1 war machine. From an invaded land, they became the rulers of Germany. This is more than just a history video. It is a journey through centuries of bloodshed, where empires were built and then collapsed with blood and iron. You will meet Otto von Bismarck, the political genius who reshaped the entire map of Europe. Meet the Prussian soldiers, men who lived, fought, and died for an ideal that never existed until they created it. And the final question, can an empire built on blood and iron really last? If you love history, or are simply curious about how a vanished nation could shape an entire continent, then let's begin. Follow the footsteps of Prussia, from ancient legend to imperial throne and disappearance without a goodbye. Before Prussia became a nation, the land was known by many names, but in the first centuries AD, it had no boundaries, no maps, just dense forests, wild lands on the Baltic coast. There lived tribes that we now call the Old Prussians, a Baltic language group, closely related to the Lithuanians and Latvians. They were neither conquering warriors like the Romans, nor empires, but farming, hunting forest, worshiping communities. Spirituality occupies a very important place in their lives. They worship Perkunus, the god of thunder, Petrimpo, the god of water, and Pekuls, the lord of the dead. Every forest, every large rock, every spring is a sacred place, guarded by the VD Lotus priests. They lived simply but skillfully, taking advantage of natural resources. The most precious thing they possessed, not gold or silver, was amber. In ancient times, amber from the Baltic Sea was known as gold of the north. The Prussian tribes lived freely, no king, no state. Each group had its own leader, defending itself with spears, axes, and bows. They often formed alliances for defense, but lacked a central government, and that was their fatal weakness. They were surrounded by larger powers, the Slavs, the Germans, the Lithuanians. Ancient Prussia was not isolated, but was always caught in the middle of conflicts and raids. In the 8th century, the Prussians defeated a neighboring tribe, the Mazovians, and founded Trussia, the first center of trade and crafts, but the young city lasted just over a century before being destroyed by the Vikings in the late 9th century. The culture of ancient Prussia was a world unto itself, close to nature and of incredible spiritual depth. But all of this was under threat. Western knights were beginning to take notice of the wild lands. In 1226, in what would become a double-edged sword in history, Duke Conrad of Mazovia invited the Teutonic Knights to Prussia. He needed an army to destroy the pagan tribes, but he underestimated the ambitions of the white-cloaked knights. The Teutonic Order, originally founded in the Holy Land to care for pilgrims, had morphed into a crusader army with a mission to convert by the sword. They were sword-wielding monks, living by monastic rules, but fighting like ruthless machines. The knights brought more than war. They brought architecture, organization, and absolute control. They built fortresses across the land, from Thorn to Marienburg, turning the tribal lands into a militarized network. But the Prussians did not fall easily. They hid in the forests, organized guerrilla resistance, and even allied with the Lithuanians and Pomeranians, who had also been targets of the knights. The leader of the largest uprising was Hercus Monte, a Prussian who had been captured and educated in Germany. He returned to fight against the very people who had taught him. But despite his intelligence and tenacity, Hercus failed, and the Prussian resistance collapsed in the mid-13th century. After the brutal conquests, Prussia was converted en masse. From the sacred forests and local gods, they were forced to kneel before the cross. The language, culture, and beliefs of the Prussians were gradually wiped out. Only a few scattered ancient manuscripts remain. The knights were no longer guests. They had established themselves as a monastic state, a military power in religious guise. And on the ashes of ancient Prussia, a new empire was born, disciplined, territorial, and ambitious. After defeating and assimilating the Prussians, the Teutonic Order did not stop there. They turned fortresses into capitals, chapels into centers of government, and conquered lands into Germanized colonies. By the mid-14th century, the Teutonic Order had become an independent, wealthy, and dangerous religious military empire. But their neighbors did not stand still. The Teutonic Order continued to attack the remaining pagan lands, especially the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the last pagan state in Europe. A war not just for land, but also the last crusade of Europe. To survive, Lithuania joined forces with Poland through a royal marriage and converted to Catholicism. The two once opposing powers became allies against the Teutonic Order. And in 1409, the flames of war broke out, leading to the greatest battle of the Eastern European Middle Ages. On the morning of July 15, 1410, on the Grunwald field, the two most powerful armies in Europe at that time faced each other. On one side were 27,000 Teutonic soldiers, white shirts, shining swords. On the other side was the Polish-Lithuanian-Ruthenian alliance, nearly 40,000 soldiers of all ethnicities. Before the battle, Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen sent 2 swords to the King of Poland as a final challenge. Little did he know, that very day would mark the downfall of the most powerful warrior monk order in Europe. The battle broke out in smoke, blood, and fire. The Lithuanians feigned retreat, drawing the Teutonic cavalry into the trap. The Poles held the center, and at the decisive moment, launched an attack from both flanks. Ulrich, the Grandmaster, fell on the battlefield he had chosen. Although the Allies failed to capture Marienburg, the capital of the Knights, the Battle of Grunwald broke the Teutonic Order's military backbone. They were never the same again. An empire that had once been feared throughout Eastern Europe began to decline. After the Battle of Grunwald, the Teutonic Order was no longer a major threat. They lost territory, lost morale, and most importantly, lost political power. Meanwhile, another power was quietly growing: Brandenburg. In 1454, the Prussian cities revolted against the Knights because of heavy taxes. The 13 Years' War broke out, ending with the Treaty of Toruń in 1466. Prussia was divided into two. Royal Prussia was part of Poland. Ducal Prussia remained part of the Teutonic Order, but had to submit to Poland. But the Teutonic Order only lasted a few more decades. In the early 16th century, the last Grand Master, Albert of Brandenburg, converted to Protestantism, dissolved the Knights, and made Ducal Prussia a secular domain. The first Duke of modern Prussia was born from the House of Hohenzollern. In 1618, the name Brandenburg Prussia officially appeared when the two lands were united under the Hohenzollern dynasty, a dynasty that controlled both the Holy Roman Empire and the Polish territories. A complex structure, but extremely practical. The founder of modern Prussian power was Frederick William, known as the Great Elector. He built a modern army, reorganized the administration, and, most notably, after the Treaty of Wehlau in 1657, won absolute sovereignty for Prussia from Poland. From a colony, Prussia is now an independent country in military, political, and administrative terms. Under the hands of the Hohenzollern family, an iron-disciplined dynasty is gradually replacing the old ruins to shape a new empire. In 1701, under Frederick I, the Prussian realm was elevated to new stature. With the consent of the Holy Roman Emperor, he proclaimed himself King of Prussia, marking the first time Prussia became an independent kingdom. But the situation was still strange. The Kingdom of Prussia was not part of the Holy Roman Empire, while Brandenburg, the rest of it, remained a vassal of the empire. So the Prussian king was an independent monarch in the east, but a dependent elector in the west, a situation unique in European history. Frederick I was succeeded by Frederick William I, known as the Soldier King. He cut royal waste, built an efficient bureaucracy, and, most importantly, created the most elite professional army in Europe. But the man who put Prussia on the map of European power was none other than his son, Frederick II, known to posterity as Frederick the Great. A military genius, an Enlightenment thinker, a musician, a king who ruled by sword and by thought. After the death of Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI, Europe fell into chaos. Frederick the Great took advantage of the situation to invade Silesia, a rich industrial region, from Austria. Despite being surrounded by many enemies, he held his territory and won. Prussia won, and all of Europe began to tremble. But every rise comes at a price. In the 7 Years' War, Frederick faced Austria, France, Russia, and Sweden all at once, single-handedly taking on the continent. The Prussian army was brought to the brink of destruction several times, but through shrewd strategy and political luck, he revived and preserved his kingdom. When the war ended, Prussia not only survived, it became a symbol of military efficiency, administrative discipline, and reform. From fortresses, to schools, to religious policy, Prussia became a model for the future Germany. In the mid-19th century, a sharp-tongued, decisive, and full-blooded politician stepped onto the stage of power: Otto von Bismarck, the Prussian prime minister. The man who would unify Germany not with ideals, but with blood and iron. Bismarck did not pursue a vague dream of national unity. He pursued a pragmatic plan of 3 steps, 3 wars, to unify Germany under Prussia. Step 1, war with Denmark. Step 2, war with Austria. Step 3, war with France. In 1864, Prussia and Austria defeated Denmark to regain the 2 duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, which had large German populations. But that was just an excuse. Bismarck had begun to lead Austria into a political trap. In 1866, Prussia declared war on Austria over control of Holstein. Within 7 weeks, Prussia crushed the Austrians, ousted them from the German Confederation, and became the leader of the northern states. Bismarck knew all that was needed was a common enemy to unite Germany. He orchestrated the Ems telegram, which led to France declaring war, and so Germans from north to south, from Bavaria to Saxony, fought side by side against Napoleon III. At the Battle of Sedan in 1870, the Prussian army captured Napoleon III, shaking France. Nothing could stop the Germans from uniting. Their common enemy had fallen. On January 18, 1871, at the Palace of Versailles, in the heart of defeated France, Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed the first emperor of a united Germany, and thus the German Empire was born, led by Prussia. In just a few decades, Prussia went from being a subject to being an empire builder. Under Bismarck and the might of the Prussian army, a new Europe was redrawn, and from then on, Prussia was no longer a land. It was the heart of modern Germany. After 1871, Prussia did not disappear. It absorbed Germany. The new German Empire was established, but its apparatus, army, laws, and political culture all bore the Prussian stamp. Germany at this time was not the Germany of philosophers, but the Germany of generals. After Bismarck, Emperor Wilhelm II came to power. Lacking Bismarck's courage, he pushed Germany into confrontation with all of Europe, not through strategy, but through old Prussian pride. World War I was the inevitable outcome. When World War I ended in 1918, the German Empire collapsed. Prussia still existed in name, but was stripped of all military and political power. Once the ruler, now Prussia was a shadow within the Weimar Republic. But militarism did not die. It simply lay dormant. When Hitler came to power, he inherited Prussia's administrative structure, repressive apparatus, and disciplinary spirit, but transformed them into a brutal dictatorship. Prussia, though it no longer had a name, became a ghost in the fascist apparatus. After World War II, the Allies no longer hesitated. In 1947, they officially declared the dissolution of the Prussian state, seeing it as the source of German militarism. Prussia, once a symbol of power, was now completely erased from the map. Prussia is gone, but its legacy lives on. Cities like Berlin, Königsberg, Danzig still bear the Prussian mark. Lessons about power, organization, and the dangers of extremism still relevant in today's world. Prussia ruled with blood and iron, dreaming of a new order for Europe. But its brutality and arrogance led to its own destruction. And so Prussia, the country no longer on the map, remains one of the most important chapters in world history. There are so many battles buried by time, stories you deserve to hear. If this one felt worth remembering, drop a comment and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.